Serious, what's the hardest moral decision you've ever had to make? I lied to my parents about my grandmother's death. My parents hadn't been on a vacation in 30 years. My grandmother was 95. So when she passed when they had 5 days left on their cruise, my family decided that we wouldn't ruin it for them. We would just plan the whole funeral, and if my mom wanted to make changes when she got back, we'd organize that for her. There was nothing they could do to get home anyways. Every day when they checked in, I worked with my dad. I would just go on like everything was fine. Hardest thing I've ever done. After 2 cardiac arrest events and resuscitations, I had to end life support for my 12-day-old daughter. My choices were a few more hours, days of pain, or allow to go with love and grace. She took her very last breath in my arms. She would have turned 14 this year and the pain still sits just under the surface. Hey mate, I just wanna say that you did your best and that you made sure that she didn't suffer any more than she had to. She would be proud of you. Stay strong. The first friend I made when I got to my unit after basic was kind of an odd duck. Let's call him Specialist Anders. He welcomed me and brought me out back to smoke and relax before formation. Over the years we grew kind of close. His weird humor could make the most boring convoy tolerable. Anders always liked to drink, but when his wife left him it got dark. One morning he came up to me and said he got his ex a present. He smelled pretty strongly of alcohol. I followed him to his car where he showed me a pistol. I tried to play it cool and laughed it off, saying, "I don't think she will like that." I took it and feigned admiration as I cleared it and pocketed the magazine. He either didn't notice or was too drunk to care. I went back inside and flagged down his squad leader. I told him Anders had showed me a loaded weapon. I don't know what he plans to do. Here's the mag and round from the chamber, good luck. I felt pretty crappy, like a snitch. When the company commander called me in, I felt even worse. I was told Anders was getting treatment and I did the right thing. I didn't really feel much better about myself until a few weeks ago when I saw on Facebook Anders just had a baby with his new wife, GF whatever. It hit me he may not have had that chance if he got himself arrested or worse. TLDR, I snitched out a fellow lower enlisted for bringing a loaded gun. I once had a temp assistant who was amazing, but she couldn't pass the stupid typing test that HR was administering for her to be able to be hired full time. She had 3 chances and she failed the first 2. I made some excuse to the HR person that I needed to go into the interview room to give her a pep talk, and I closed the door and told her to let me sit in front of the computer and I did the test myself. Not too perfect, just enough so that she could pass. It was a moral choice and I still struggle with whether it was the right thing to do. When she was eventually hired, I continued to mentor her. She was from a less than ideal upbringing and a single mom, and eventually she was promoted several times. I left the company and years later she called me and said that because I had helped her when she was desperate and it seemed she would never be hired full time, and because I cared enough to be her mentor, she eventually graduated from college with honors and was now an executive mentoring her own assistant. Ah frick the system, you did a moral thing. She's obviously a competent woman who just can't type super fast. I mean, I'm a competent, intelligent individual and sometimes I forget how to spell certain words. The system exists for the status quo and you just helped get her foot in the door. Seems to me she did the rest herself. So good on you. My father was a drug addict and had been passed out for over a day. My grandma asked me if I wanted to call the ambulance. I was 17. I said no because last time I called he was violently angry. He passed away. I kicked my mother out of my first apartment. It was very hard, but it was necessary. She is a toxic, parasitic sociopath, and I never should have let her stay with me in the first place. She later told me it was the best thing anyone could have done for her. I know multiple people who need to do this. Obviously you have to give your family a lot of leeway, especially your parents, but there's a level of toxicity and life ruining that you don't have to put up with from anyone. My decision to leave my bipolar girlfriend, she was in one of the worst cycles in her life, would avoid me every chance she could and started saying some awful things to me, implying that I wanted her to hurt herself, etc. I loved her more than anything in the world, but I knew being with her was breaking my heart as well as putting stress that she didn't need on her life. I know that the woman I loved was in there somewhere, but I felt that I owed it to myself to stop being the martyr and find a happier, more stable relationship. Last I heard, she is still not doing great. I don't blame myself, but it still keeps me up at night knowing that she is suffering alone. One time I was really poor and having trouble feeding myself. I found a wallet stuffed with multiple hundreds. I turned it in. Then some butthole stole my MP3 player later that day. Karma must have been taking a vacation that day. My ex overdosed on H and Xanax in front of me. His eyes were glazed over, his pulse was faint, and he was unresponsive. I knew if I called the police, it would ruin his life. I called the paramedics. The police came anyway and they arrested him. He's out now, and on probation, but he resents me for what I did. I don't regret it because I could have let him die there and that would have destroyed me. I also know that probation is keeping him sober for now and I just want him to be safe. My university has a policy that anyone who needs emergency care due to illegal drugs alcohol will not be reported to the authorities to prevent situations like this from turning into deaths. I think it should be more widespread. I'm the product of prostitution. I'm adopted and I found my birth mom about 8 years ago. After doing a bit of a search I figured out who my father supposedly was. He has passed and located his sons who live in my town. I chose not to contact them. It wouldn't be fair to find out that your dad had been banging a adult prostitute when you thought he was happily married to your mom. It was hard to give up my desire to know more, but I think I made the right decision. Whoa, I imagine the decision did not come easy to you. I took a job for money. It routinely tugged at my morality. Two things stick out. The wholesale killing of sick kittens I knew could have been easily treated. I had to leave and weep for a while afterward. I was working on a dog that was mean with fare. She was improving after some days of working with her. Invested a lot of myself into saving her life. But then the orders came down. The job was botched bad and I had to pin her by the neck against a wall while the executioner tranquilized her. She had a bad reaction to the dope and stumbled around. Then lay on the floor twitching and vomiting and pee. And then we put the long needle through her heart. I sat in that filth and watched my friend gasp and choke until her life ran out and she lay motionless on the concrete in a dark, damp cage. Her last experience was that of pure horror. There was nothing humane about that. I kept her collar for a long time. Had a severe mental breakdown. It was the last straw. Having to essentially kill the person I loved most in life, my grandmother. She was in the hospital for a little over a week and came back home, still in not very good health. To put it in good terms, she was a lifelong smoker and had terrible COPD. A couple months later she was taken back to her. She had fallen a little after midnight and stopped breathing. I visit her every day, trying to take my mother to visit her as well as often as possible. Our family is just her, my mother, and I. She stayed in the hospital once again for about a week and her health only got worse and worse during this second visit. The doctor told us essentially we had no way to save her. Her COPD caused her to develop extremely rapidly increasing lung cancer. Pus filled her entire right lung which was collapsed. Her breathing got worse and worse. This woman did everything for me. The kindest person I ever met. She also loved to help others. I only wanted to ever somehow repay all her kindness. Though she knew how much I loved her, I wanted to achieve success. Financially, we grew up in a struggling lower middle class family. My mother always in constant debt and struggles. My grandma never having the quality of life she deserved, so that she would no longer worry about my mother and myself. I didn't achieve this goal in time and I failed. It has been tough living with that. Anyways, as the week progressed we realized we needed to make the decision to let her go. She told us many times when she was at home in better health throughout the years that she would never want extraordinary measures if it came to that. So we were not about to put her on ventilation or that sort of thing. The doctors explained to us that we just needed to give them the okay to dose her with excessive amounts of morphine and pull her off oxygen, etc. It took my mother 3 days to finally give them the okay. It had to be done. She was only suffering, and there was no cure for all that was wrong with her at this point. Finally we went down early in the morning on Saturday. We said our goodbyes to her, though she was pretty much sleeping and likely dying on her own anyways, but suffering regardless. They hooked her to a morphine drip and pulled the oxygen and everything off. Took my mother, her, and I to her private room. We stayed with her for about 3-4 hours until she passed. I watched her literally take her last breath and die in front of me. I'm 22 years old and I will be surprised if I ever go through anything as difficult again. I can only imagine what it is like for a parent to lose a child early on. The person they want to only protect and care for, which is how I felt for her as I get older. I only ever wanted to care for her and to better her life, and it ended like this. That was about 4 months ago now. I don't know if this helps, but I wouldn't say you essentially killed her. The illness is what killed her. She would still have died if you had done nothing. What you did was allow her to pass in the manner she had chosen. There are few greater kindnesses than that. I was in school abroad and a fellow student was sexually assaulted by 2 other students. The program director knew about it but didn't want to lose funding by telling the university, so she pulled the girl, the victim, aside and basically brainwashed her into thinking that it was her own fault, and went to all of the students individually to tell them about how she admitted that she lied about being a loose drunk. I was somewhat close with her and she was showing signs of PTSD. I thought I should have minded my own business, but I knew in my gut that the wrong thing was happening. The program director had broken crap tons of rules in other ways and I felt like I would regret it if I didn't speak up. It really tore me up because I didn't want to deprive the girl of her choice to report or not report what happened to her, but the program director was at villainous levels of incompetence and discrimination was her middle name. We were going to all head home the next week, so I called the school first thing after I got off the plane. As retaliation, the program director tried to retroactively flunk me, but I'm really good at documenting things, so she couldn't. Ultimately, I don't know if I did the right thing, but I don't think I could have lived with myself if I stayed quiet. Plus, it was one of the first times I stood up to an authority figure and said, no, you're not automatically right just because you have power. I've always been pretty shy. This story made me so mad. You're a good person for calling the school. Not calling the police about my bipolar cousin. He was getting worse to the point where he was hallucinating and at one point said God says it's okay to kill myself. After hearing this at the same time that my uncles found a loaded gun on his bed, I was told not to call police. He committed suicide soon after. A year later, his father, my uncle, did the same. We were very close. Mental illness is no joke, people. If you see someone like this, please call for help. I will regret this decision of not calling for the rest of my life. Whether or not to take my grandmother off life support when the doctor informed us that there was no hope. It was a heartbreaking decision because she was so special. I asked myself this: if the situation were reversed, what would she have decided for me? I'm late, but I've let my mother attempt suicide. My parents are divorced. I'm the oldest child, and she has no other family. She's had severe depression since she was a teenager. I started actively stopping her when I was about 12. At that age, I would go out of my way to find her guns and throw them into the river. I'm 21 now, and last summer, I knew she was going to try and I let it happen. I just went to sleep that night and woke up the next morning for work. I remember folding clothes and thinking I would go over to her apartment after my shift to see if she was there, dead or alive. She ended up texting me before it got to that point. It still makes me feel like a murderer sometimes, but I was just so exhausted. I've done literally everything I can think of, and it's like we're in a never-ending cycle that only has one possible ending. When my terminally ill dad was asking me to give him more morphine, but I knew he had already had 5 times the stated dose, I called the doctor out to him. The doctor told me to give my dad whatever he wanted, and I did. My dad was rather tough. He died 2 months later. And you made those months bearable and less painful. Not everyone has understanding or capable relatives and doctors. Deciding whether or not I could be a good parent at age 25 or to abort. The girl I got pregnant and I weren't dating, and I was having substance abuse problems. We are together now and our son is almost 2. I have been sober for 2 years, 7 months and 3 days. Probably not my hardest moral decision ever, but I was 13, so it seemed like it at the time. In 7th grade I wasn't a popular girl, but I did have friends. My best friend and I always talked about what it would be like to be included with those girls that every middle school has. There wasn't anything wrong with us, we had just yet to blossom. I somehow ended up becoming sort of friends with the cool kids and was invited to a sleepover on a Friday night. I couldn't contain my excitement until I realized that Friday was my best friend's 14th birthday and she was not invited to this sleepover. I felt so torn because I knew how hurt my friend would be if I chose those girls. For that sheer reason, I did the moral thing and spent that night with my true friend. I knew I made the right decision when I found out at school the next Monday that those girls snuck guys and alcohol into the basement and one of them had to get their stomachs pumped. Therefore they all got in huge trouble. I was still pretty innocent then, so I'm curious to see what choice I would have made under that peer pressure. Nonetheless, being a loyal friend kept me from being involved with a scary bad night. Grew up in a poor town. Hardest moral choice I've made was to leave my best friends behind. On my own. I was smart enough to avoid pitfalls they fell into: drugs, loose women, fathering children too young, getting married too young, etc. Together with them, I made less than beneficial choices for myself. They were great friends growing up, but I left them behind to better myself and my life. Absolute hardest thing I've ever had to do. Felt like I repaid their loyalty and friendship with betrayal. Would I do it over again? In a heartbeat. Too many things I need to do and see to let them drag me down. I've decided to stick around and make sure my now ex-girlfriend gets the help she needs for her depression and anxiety, even though she cheated on me. I realized through the ordeal that she's broken and her whole life has been a cycle of getting hurt and abandoned by people she cares about and then hurting others out of self-hatred. Despite what she did to me, I know she needs someone to show her what unconditional love means and point her in the right direction. I don't want a relationship with her in the future, but I'm willing to stay as a friend and help her find resources to get better. It's freaking rough. Ro, you are a strong and amazing person. I'm not bipolar, but anxious and somewhat sad. Everyone that comes into my life eventually abandons me and I've since given up hope. I hope you may find someone with a heart as big as yours someday. Take care of yourself. Forgiving my little brother. He did a lot of crap when he was addicted. He hurt a lot of people. He stole, more or less, from my grandparents. He wrote bad checks on my account, like $1,500 worth. He kept getting into trouble, wrecking cars, breaking promises. It took him a few tries to get clean, a few relapses, and it's always going to be a struggle. But right now, he's thriving. He's working. He's staying out of trouble. And I can tell when talking to him that he's clean. My love for him overtook my anger at what he did before. We made the decision to cancel our wedding and get married in our new home country after my insane mother tried to take over. This meant that my very ill father would not be at our wedding and that the rest of the family would not be able to afford to travel to the wedding. I was very close to my father and the rest of the family, and with the pressure society places on daughters to love their mothers no matter what, it was a very difficult decision. But our wedding day was perfect. That was 4 years ago. Last November I decided to stop talking to her completely. This also meant that I would no longer have contact with my now much worse father. I miss him very much, but dementia has claimed his mind and he sleeps most of the time. When I'd call to see him, she would usually be in the background waiting to have a fight or yelling at his carers. It was horrible. For me, choosing to remove her from my life and thereby removing him was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. Hugs, it's never easy to make those kinds of decisions, especially when others will suffer. I think you did the right thing, and if your father was more healthy and lucid, he'd agree with you. For me, it was leaving my home with my kid brother still there. I raised him for the first 5 years of his life. All of his day-to-day care was managed by me. His mother is horrible. I can't stand her. She is my mother too. She was horrible to me, but treated him like a king, if she was ever around, of course. So when I became 18 I decided to leave. It was so hard. Leaving a kid behind with a woman you hate is devastatingly hard. But I could care for him physically on my own. He turned out to be an amazing kid and I couldn't be prouder. But every single day I worry if I made the wrong decision. It's been 12 years and it still makes me feel bad. The first 5 years are insanely important in child development. So glad he had you to care for him. Hardest moral decision I've ever made was whether or not to accept a consulting job for an organization that is making the world a worse place. In the end I did the work, because the alternative would have meant losing my job and health insurance. My ex-friend told me she was going to break up with her GF, but didn't tell me when. Said GF is attempting to move to Chicago, get an apartment, etc. She believes that my ex-friend will be moving in with her as soon as college is done with. She asks me if I know anything about an impending breakup, etc. I lied and told her no, because that wasn't my business to tell. My crappy ex-friend waited for her GF to move to Chicago, isolate herself, and then broke up with her and stole her dog. Had I known my ex-friend was going to be such a bee about everything, I probably would have told her GF then and there. The GF still doesn't know I knew, and probably never will. It was wrong of my ex-friend to tell me that, and she knows it. The GF and I are still friends, but she's mentally unstable. Thankfully, she's now seeking treatment, but she's scared and alone in Chicago. I don't know what to do. The hardest decision I've ever had to make was breaking up with my girlfriend of 6 years. She was my first serious girlfriend, and I had lived with her for the vast majority of the relationship. She is a wonderful person, smart and funny. My problem was I had never been on my own, and honestly had never really been with anyone besides her. Feelings of doubt crept in over time and only got stronger as the years passed by. We got a cat together, and moved to a new city where she went to school and I worked. This whole time family members and friends would ask about marriage and our plans for the future, and I would give them a short answer just to move on from these now uncomfortable topics. I never told anyone about how I felt in regards to wanting something different. Not my parents, not my friends, and in a way, I even kept the yearning for a more independent lifestyle hidden from myself, because why would I throw away a relationship with such a great person? Still though, many days and nights I would think about what it would be like to be on my own. These feelings never went away. She graduated from her program and now it was my turn to do what I wanted because she can work now. And what did I want to do? I wanted out of the relationship. One day we took a walk together. Afterwards I held her hand and finally told her how I really felt. It all came out at once and it definitely shattered her world. I felt a huge mixture of anxiety and, strangely enough, relief. I had been harboring these mixed feelings about our relationship for so long, and to let them be known, it felt like an enormous weight was taken off my shoulders. It's been over a year since this happened, and I have what I wanted: independence. Is it what I thought it would be? Not in the least. The dating world has changed, and I'm not the great catch I thought I would be. It's been a humbling year for me, and being on my own is harder than I could have ever imagined. There's a crushing loneliness to it, and a sense of overwhelming isolation that comes with believing that no one has my back anymore. It's up to me to make crap happen in my life. On the flip side, I know I'm a stronger person for having gone through with this decision. As difficult as my life can be now, I wouldn't have it any other way, because I've also come to learn more about myself than I would have had I stayed in the relationship. I'm a stronger person and definitely have an easier time making decisions when it comes to what's best for me. There are still times I think I may have made a huge mistake breaking up with her, but dwelling on what could have been won't be of any help. I know that the hardest decision I've ever made is the only decision I could have made at the time. The guy I was obsessed with in HS contacted me on FB a couple years ago and wanted to have sex. We were both married, but he made a convincing argument why we should do it. I was unhappy in my marriage at the time, so I was really tempted to do it, but I didn't because I didn't want to do that to my husband, even though he probably deserved it. Going no contact with my friend, who I was deeply in love with. He had recently been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I told him that I liked him as more than a friend, and he didn't see me that way. I gave myself the weekend to be upset about it, and then I was okay. He was still one of my best friends. I wanted to be there for him, but the way he acted, he literally kept alternating between let's hang out and be BFFs and stay away from me, you creep. For every conversation, he wouldn't let me be alone near him because he was convinced I was going to sexually assault him. I never gave any indication whatsoever that I would ever do that, because I wouldn't. Finally, I realized two things: that this drama between us was not going to go away soon, and that it was hurting not just me, but him, too. He needed to be in the best most supportive environment he could be in to deal with his BD, and I was making it worse. And not only that, but this was having a really bad effect on me, too. I couldn't put myself through it anymore, so I cut him off. 6 months later, I found out he committed suicide. One of my great regrets in life is not being there for him. I had stopped him from doing it once, right before his diagnosis. I'm about 98% sure I wouldn't have been able to save him this time, but I will never not regret not being there to try. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.